This talk was given by Roshi Martin, guiding teacher of the Endless Path Zendo, a lay Buddhist community in Rochester, New York. Join our practice, in person or online, at endlesspathzendo.org.
Today is the last evening of our 5-day Jataka Sesshin of October 24 here at the Vermont Zen Center. So again, we'll look at a Jataka that we may have touched on once, maybe in the past, maybe twice. An earlier version of this chapter appears in Before Buddha Was Buddha, Learning from the Jataka Tales, a book of mine from 2017, but this is a different approach to it. So traditionally, the Buddha is held to be the narrator of the Jatakas. He told them to reveal the karmic roots of an issue current in his Sangha, as well as to encourage and inspire his listeners by sharing the details of his own long journey. The tales were canonical within 100 years of his death, but not entered into written forms until the year 400 or so, almost 800 years later. The stories became immensely popular in all Buddhist countries. Giuseppe Tucci, who traveled in pre-communist Tibet, recounts his astonishment at finding that the roughest sort of men, Tibetan caravaneers and mule drivers, when they gathered at night around their campfires and Jatakas were told, simply broke down and wept like babies to hear of the Buddha's great effort. While many of the oral tales have been lost, two textual strands survive. The Pali Jataka of 547 tales and the 34 stories of the purposefully inspirational and deeply influential Sanskrit Mahayana text, the Jatakamala, or Garland, or Rosary of Jatakas, written by Aryashura. Fragments also exist in Nepalese texts, in Scythian Khotanese verses, as well as in sutras and related texts. They also appear in the Ajanta cave paintings at Dunhuang, at Borobudur, and are closely aligned with other significant Buddhist monuments and stupas. For this last night of Sesshin, we'll look at a brief and unusual Jataka, the Mandhata Jataka, number 258 in the Pali Jataka of 547 such tales. So, long ago, in the early ages of this world, so far back there is no way now of computing it, there lived a king named Mahasamata, who had a son named Roja, who had a son named Baroja, who had a son Kalyana, who had a son Varakalyana, and Varakalyana had a son named Uposta, and Uposta had a son named Mandhata. When grown, Mandhata was so great a monarch he could make a rain of jewels fall from a clear blue sky by simply clenching his left hand into a fist and touching it with his right. For 84,000 years, he was the prince of the land. For another 84,000 years, he helped his father, the king, rule. For another 84,000 years, he was king himself, ruler of the world. His glorious life lasted for ages, its radiance and majesty undimmed. One day, he found he could not immediately satisfy some desire. What it was is impossible to say. All we know is that for the first time, he experienced discontent. "What ails you, Lord?" asked an attendant, seeing frown lines forming on that great monarch's face. "My merit is great," said the king, who of course was the Buddha in an earlier birth. "No one's is greater. This I know, yet I now find I'm no longer satisfied. Is there some realm better than this, more worth the desiring? Do you know?" "Heaven, Lord," answered the attendant. "There it is said all desires are fulfilled and no one is dissatisfied. Here on earth, truth be told, we face much that is barely tolerable. If heaven is best, said Mandhata. "That is where I must go." Gathering a retinue, he went off in his great spinning wheel of empire, rising up and up until he reached the starry heaven of the four great celestial kings. The four great kings of heaven were bearing celestial flowers, perfumes, and jeweled robes, attended by a company of shining gods, welcomed Mandhata. Showering him with heavenly delights, they showed him the wonders of their heaven. Then, in recognition of his immense store of merit, they gave him rule over it as well as over themselves, and he was happy. For long ages he remained perfectly happy, perfectly content. But then, after long ages had passed and a day in heaven may equal many hundreds or thousands of years on earth, there came a time when he could not satisfy some desire. Big or small, what it was, who could say? He grew uneasy. Lines of frustration appeared on his brow. His mouth assumed a downward curve. Is this it, then? Is this all? Is this the very best? Is there nothing more? "Oh, no, my lord," answered the four celestial kings. "Compared to those who dwell above us in the heaven of the 33, we are like servants or common working men. There's no comparison at all. That realm is much more perfect, more beautiful, and splendid by far." "I cannot believe I've not known this until now," exclaimed Mandhata in surprise. "Then I must go there. Farewell." And with his court around him, he again set the wheel of empire spinning and ascended to the heaven of the 33, where Shakra, king of the gods, surrounded by great gods of magnificent beauty and splendor, welcomed Mandhata, giving him all he desired. But Mandhata's eldest son, saluting his father, took the wheel of empire and descended back to the realms of men and came again to his own city, while his father, Mandhata, stayed on happy, very, very happy, to be in the glorious heaven of the 33, where all desires are fulfilled. Shakra himself, pleased by that great king's delight, gave him half of that shining kingdom to rule beside him. They ruled together in splendor and joy. 30 million years they ruled, and that in that time Shakra was born from the worlds of the gods back to this earth, and another Shakra arose and ruled in that high heaven alongside the undying earthly king Mandhata. In this way, 36 Chakras came and went, and many world ages rolled by, while Mandhata, still in his own human body, ruled on beside each successive chakra in that perfectly heavenly realm. Then a desire arose in Mandhata's mind, and this desire we do know. It was the desire to rule in heaven by himself alone. "Why should I share this splendid heaven?" he thought. "Why not fulfill my desire and do as I please? I have outlived 35 chakras. I should be rid of this current one, for what is he but another in an endless line of such kings of the gods, and rule on my own. I desire it. I will fulfill my desire." And with that single, self-centered thought, the power of unending life in him began to fade. Old age seized him. As a human body cannot die or disintegrate in heaven, he fell back to earth like a meteor burning across the night, landing in a park, living, but very, very old and very, very weak, ancient as the dust. A gardener, having seen this fiery descent, ran to where the burning star fell, but instead of a star, he found an old, old man wearing glittering jewels in a robe of shining gold. At once the gardener set off to alert the royal family, who quickly came and gathered around the old king, for such they saw he must be. Mandhata, opening his rheumy eyes, looked upon those gathered around him, king and queen, princes, princesses, and nobles. Mandhata am I, he said, king of kings. I ruled the great earth in my time. Then I ruled in both lower and higher heavens for the lifetimes of 36 chakras. What can you know of that? It is too many years to begin to count. Now I die, but desire outlives me. There is no end to it. This I know for myself and for sure. I have gone the limit. No one can go further in attempting to satisfy desire. But it shall not be so forever. I will return to this, our Saha world, our bearable, challenging world where effort leads to freedom, and work here to be free of desire, no longer its slave, but its master. With that, the great Mana, Mandhata, he who had been king of kings not only on earth, but in heaven, the Buddha himself in a long distant past life, passed from that singular existence to fare on, as the Jataka say, according to his own thoughts and deeds. So that's the story. Strange one. We tend to think of the Buddha as the paragon of all goodness, wisdom, and virtue. Why not? Our vast, empty nature, uncluttered by time and space, is whole and complete. In a word, perfect. The Buddha Shakyamuni, the Buddha of our historical time, not only realized this, but embodied it fully. Yet the depth of the Bodhisattva vow revealed by Jataka tradition demonstrates that it took even him countless lifetimes to do this. Like us, he learned by making mistakes. Falling down and getting back up can be the essence of the way. In the Divyadana, a collection of Avadana, or noble giving past life stories of the Buddha and other great practitioners of the Buddha's time, the Mandhata Jataka appears in a more complex form. Additionally, the Avadana reveals that it was told by the Buddha at the time that he announced his approaching parinirvana, or death. So brief and odd as it is, as the last or among the last Jatakas he ever told, it gains poignancy and depth. These are close to being his deathbed words. The tale's very briefness suggesting that it was told by someone for whom every breath counts. At that emotionally charged time, along with the telling of this Jataka, the Buddha offered this teaching. In a previous time, Ananda, I was filled with attachment, with hate, and with delusion, and wasn't liberated from birth, old age, sickness, death, sorrow, lamentation, suffering, grief, or despair. However, experiencing the presence of death, I delivered a sermon on karma such that many hundreds of thousands of beings left behind the household life and went forth as seers would do. And then by way of illustration, he tells the Mandhata Jataka. In the Pali version, which is the basis of our story, he does not address many thousands or hundreds of thousands of beings, but only a very small number. However, over the 2,500 years since the Jataka was told, who knows how many, having heard it, were able to one degree or another leave off self-centered living. The numbers might add up. And what is the message that so affected them? Zen teachers might put it simply as, keep going. The Buddha said, as regards the spiritual life, there are only two errors you can make. One is not starting. The other is not continuing all the way. Some contemporary Buddhist writers present the quote as one mistake would be not starting and the other not continuing. This is clever, but not the same as saying going all the way, which means to full enlightenment. The point of the Buddhist teaching is liberation, and it affirms, this story affirms, this quote from the Buddha affirms, the Jatakas affirm that it is the birthright of us all, not just something set aside for those with special talents or special virtues. The Buddha was not a novice in going all the way. Jatakas like the tigress, like the banyan deer, like the brave parrot show total commitment. He also clearly knew about error from personal experience, as the Gutala Jataka of the musician and this Mandhata Jataka of the King of Kings revealed. The Mandhata Jataka in particular looks at the fundamental error of trying to satisfy desire, and in this becomes a tale not simply of error, but of ripening and maturing. Most likely, our maturing, or in our maturing, we will not see jewels falling from the sky. We will not find ourselves ruling in higher realms alongside gods. We will not find ourselves having a lifespan of millions of years. Yet nonetheless, like Mandhata, we will more than likely find ourselves facing thorny issues of desire and its satisfaction, of which, as the Rolling Stones complained, we can't get no. Give the self what it desires, and it soon wants more. Fill ourselves to the brim, and we soon feel deficient again. Must we wait till we're on our deathbed before we realize that something's fundamentally awry? The Buddha seems to have told this Jataka as a final effort to encourage us to awake beyond the unconscious self-centered habits that cause not only personal dissatisfaction, but communal, national, and planetary suffering. The good news is that what we desire is truly, or what we truly desire, is so much closer and so much more intimate than what we've conditioned or been conditioned to believe or dream. It is not out there. The telling of this personal tale by the Buddha was itself an act of selfless compassion. Without shame, for our benefit, he honestly tells us how he himself failed by literally falling for self-centeredness. In this past life as the King of Kings, the Buddha also seems to have had no regrets about his millions of years of error. He did what he needed to do, found out what he needed to find out, and moved on from there. He didn't wallow in self-pity or beat himself up over having wasted precious time. Like a scientist whose experiment has arrived at its conclusion, or like some ancient Picasso who's decided his blue period is over and it's time to head on to other colors, the Buddha's attitude seems to have been, I now know that this road doesn't lead where I want to go. Feeding desire cannot lead to contentment and happiness any more than drinking salt water can assuage thirst. I have gone the route. No one can go further. From personal experience, I know this to be true. It is time to move on. In classical accounts of the Buddha's efforts to realize enlightenment, there comes a time when he attempts to gain understanding through extreme austerities. He takes up such severe ascetic practices that eventually he is eating a single sesame seed a day. In time, his body is a wreck, his mind a disaster, Looking back at this difficult time, he says in a sutra, no one had gone further in ascetic practices. I came to the end of that road and found it did not lead to liberation. Here, he does the same, but the issue now is not punishing the self, but rather the opposite, trying to satisfy the self by fulfilling all its manifold desires. Essentially, this is hedonism, the opposite of asceticism that he now explores. By exploring such opposing paths, he demonstrates that neither complete self-denial nor total giving in to what our isolated sense of egotism desires will satisfy us. He is establishing the middle way, experimenting first with one side, then the other. Fulfillment, the essence of the middle way, means being neither too tight nor too lax. A healthy working discipline, a well-tuned, satisfying practice of body and mind is the point. The middle way is not wishy-washy, it is balanced. The Buddhist teaching, of which Zen is the core, is a path to end suffering, not a way to reinvent it. While authentic practice can be challenging, happiness is its aim, not misery. The Bodhisattva knows this for sure. How? Through personal experience. He has the mind of an explorer, a pathfinder, an artist or scientist breaking new trails to find out for himself whether a promising route leads to where he wants to go or not. Who hasn't made mistakes? Who hasn't tried one road or another with all they've got and found it a dead end? How encouraging to discover that as for the Buddha himself, personal experience, including mistakes, can be, in fact, may have to be, important to our maturing. Roshi Kapleau used to say, no earnest effort is ever wasted as long as we make it sincerely, doing our best. An eerie thing about this story remains its extraordinary view of time and space. Millions of years go by and still the Bodhisattva reigns in heaven in his human body. How weird is that? And what kind of earth did he leave? Were dinosaurs roaming beyond his palace walls? Was the city in India or Atlantis? As we peer into the dark, backward and abysm of time, and upwards to where heavens are piled upon heavens, we are both liberated and unnerved. Immense vistas of time and space open to us in this odd little tale. And what's with that spinning wheel of empire in which Mandhata travels to higher realms? It sounds suspiciously like some UFO or UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena as they're known these days. Aerial cars, flying machines in which devas, gods, fly around and visit our world to hear the Buddhist teachings are mentioned in sutras. There's even a Jataka, number 159 in the Pali Jataka, in which the Buddha is a peacock. Captured by a human king, the peacock Bodhisattva revealed that in the distant past he himself had been a great human king and had owned a jeweled flying car in which he traveled over the world. When asked for proof, he directs the human king to drain the lake beside the palace. And lo and behold, when the lake is drained, an ancient flying car is found buried under the mud of the lake bottom. As Alice said, curiouser and curiouser. Whatever has taken place in the distant past, our understanding of our planet's history remains obscured by the rise and fall of mountains, the shifting of continents, the drying and flooding of seas. Everything, beings, worlds, universes themselves, Buddhist teachings tell us, come and go, with neither beginning nor end. Aryasura, author of the influential Jataka Mala, however, states that something does persist. He writes, "Earth with its forests, noble mountains and seas may perish 100 times by fire, water, and wind as each eon comes to an end. But the great compassion of a bodhisattva, never. The great compassion of a bodhisattva, never." The aspiration to awaken and live so as to benefit all beings is woven into the nature of reality, is the nature of original unself-centered mind. Given this, the effort of trying to satisfy a small, self-centered, fundamentally illusory narrative of a self with which we've identified as myself must meet with defeat. With this little Jataka, the Buddha reveals that he himself trod that trail to its end. And there, at trail's end, he put up a clear marker for all to see. Warning, you can never satisfy desire. If he's right, and this is true, not just some nice Buddhist belief, we should expect to find this perception in other cultures as well. Perhaps you remember the Grimm brothers' tale of the fisherman's wife. In it, a magical talking flounder brings a poor fisherman and his wife to the end of the same road of unrestrained desire. I'll give you a synopsis of the story with one request. Try to hold off concern about the blatant misogyny of the narrative. Yes, the wife is made out to be the villain. But if we pay attention, we may also come to see that there's more to her than meets the eye. So here's the tale. A poor fisherman hooks a flounder, a bottom-feeding fish, and hauls it up from the depths of the blue sea. The flounder speaks and says it's really an enchanted prince, and then begs so pitifully for its life that the man, moved to compassion, releases it back into the waves. When his wife hears of this, she's furious. "You fool! It spoke! It was a magic fish! Go back and tell it that it owes us and must now fulfill our wishes for having freed it. I want a nice cottage to live in instead of this tiny hovel." The fisherman goes back to the shore of a somewhat turgid sea and calls for the flounder. The flounder rises to the surface and says, "Go home. Her wish is granted." And indeed, when he gets home, his wife is waiting at the door of a nice cottage. After a week or two, the wife says, "Go back to the flounder. I want a palace. How can I be satisfied with such a meager place?" So the fisherman trudges back to the shore and calls again. The flounder rises from a now dark and tossing sea and says, "Go back. She has what she wants." And indeed, when he gets home, he finds they now live in a palace. Well, you can see what's coming. How can you live in a palace and be happy if you're not the ruler of all you see? In short order, the wife becomes king, and they live in an even more splendid palace. Soon, that too's not enough. She becomes emperor, ruling the world from a magnificent palace of gold. But phooey, that can't be enough. And indeed, she tires of this too, and desiring yet more, becomes Pope, spiritual director of the world. But that too is only a limited kind of fulfillment, and she soon tires of it. She sees the sun shining, the clouds moving across the sky, the sun by day, the moon and stars at night. "Pooh," she says. "Go back to the flounder and tell it, I want to be God Almighty. I want to be the one who makes the clouds fly, the wind blow, the sun and moon rise and set." The fisherman goes back to the sea, but oh, he's frightened now. The once clear blue sea is dark and foul, the wind howling in a chaotic sky, polluted waves slamming against the rocks. His heart pounds and pounds, but he calls for the flounder. And when it rises from the sea, he makes his request. Wham! Next thing he knows, he's back home, where he finds his wife at the entrance to their little broken down hovel, exactly as they'd begun. Perhaps the fisherman and his wife can now, like Mandhata, the Buddha in a past life, have a chance to finally be happy. They've discovered for themselves that no matter how much we get, desire is still desire, and that its nature is never to be satisfied. Maybe satisfaction then lies elsewhere than in trying to satisfy it. So here's the wisdom of the Buddha in a fairy tale. Okay, but what about that wife? In the Grimm's tale, she's a relentless egotist. And yet, you have to hand it to her, she had the guts to go the route, persist in its folly to its inevitably bitter end. Isn't she doing what, given half a chance deep down, we'd all want to do? If we dared, desire it all, claim it all, say openly and ferociously, unrestrained by social niceties, I want it all. Blake wrote, more is the cry of a mistaken soul. Less than all cannot satisfy. More is the cry of a mistaken soul. Less than all cannot satisfy. The Buddha owned only a robe and a begging bowl, yet was said to be the richest man in the universe. Bows then to the fisherman's wife, who bravely took the fall for us all and showed the way. Like Mandhata, the Buddha in a distant past life, she demonstrates where desiring leads or where it doesn't lead. By the way, one of the traditional forms of kanon is, you guessed it, a fisherman's wife. Mandhata's stupendous quest to satisfy desire failed. It had to. Yet to quote Wuman, author of Gateless Barrier, the Wuman Quan or Wuman Khan, the failure is wonderful indeed. The unimaginably deep past lies behind each of us. A life journey of who knows how many lifetimes has brought us each right to where we are now. The last night of Sesshin is before us. With it comes a rare opportunity, one that we ourselves worked hard to put in place, to let go of all desiring and simply truly commit to this count, this breath, this koan. A million anxious, searching, error-filled years fall away. The smell of incense, the sound of footsteps, the ting of the bell, the drip of rain says it all. Whatever comes, let it enter. Let it claim us. Let it wipe away a million years of tears. Keep going now. We can each find out for ourselves if the Buddha knew what he was talking about upon his great awakening, when he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise, wonder of wonders, all beings are Buddha. No Sesshin simply ends. A Sesshin culminates. All our previous days of work are here now compressed into these last hours. The desire to know who or what we are is not self-centered. It is our nature to want to find out. Now is our chance to really work at it. Whatever we've gained or understood, whatever we've failed to gain or understand, we can, like the great pathfinder, the Buddha, let it all go. Trust ourselves and plunge anew into the practiced realization of our nature which Buddhist tradition says is so profoundly endless that even Shakyamuni Buddha himself is only and can only be halfway